They could probably hear us and they're chuckling.
Yeah, no, apparently they can.
Carl.
All right. So,
Rowena. Hi, Rowena.
oh, good. You can give her voice. She wanted to talk about the Marine Mammal Center briefly. So we are live now, and people are watching and listening. And let me introduce everybody. May I? Yes,
Go
I guess
for
I
it.
don't have to ask permission. It's my chat. So, welcome to the second of the online Pacific Cup Yacht Club seminars that we are doing instead of meeting in person and handing each other our germs. Today's topic is getting your boat back from Hawaii. We are still counting on everybody getting to Hawaii. Jim has done it on the water a whole bunch of times. I've done it 1.5 times. We will also talk about properly inspecting your boat before you head back out. And we also have Caitlin Gudekunst here, who is our sponsorship chair and a board director. And she is going to speak briefly about a completely different approach, which I have followed more often, which is to fly home. At the end, we can talk a little bit about having somebody else bring your boat back, or what I've done several times, shipping it back. Jim, would you introduce yourself, and then we get Caitlin to say a thing or two?
Sure. You know, I'm addicted. This is kind of one of these groundhog things. Done the race a bunch of times, mostly Pacific Cups, but a couple Transpacks thrown in. Done deliveries home 6 times with all kinds of configurations. So this makes for a fun presentation, and that along the way there'll be a few interesting stories.
Great. So a couple of things. One is, if you've got a question that you want to pose to Jim or to any of us for that matter, please put it up on the Q&A. We'll also check the chats, but not as frequently. And we are recording this, and we'll put it up on the site for you shortly, as soon as we can just get it cleaned up. But first, a word from our sponsor. Caitlin, would you like to talk a little bit about Alaska Airlines, which is the sponsor of our seminars, and has actually extended some nice courtesies to our participants?
Yeah, oh, I have a slide too, but I can.
I see it. I see it.
Nah, that's my slide. I just threw.
Oh.
I wasn't too sure how this was going to go, so I grabbed this.
Okay, yeah, I can talk on this one. That's fine. Yeah, so I'm the sponsorships chair. I am not the sponsor, but we have a really nice group of people who've come on board to help us, enable us to do all of these wonderful pre-departure training seminars and organize a really fun and safe race. So Alaska has been a repeat sponsor for the last 4 races, I believe, and they're our official airline, seminar, and division sponsor. So a really big deal for us. And as Michael mentioned, there are a couple ways to get back from Hawaii, but they enable us to bring our participants home by air, and also to bring your loved ones over to meet you and welcome you into the shores of Hawaii. So every year they extend a discount to all the competitors, and that discount's about 10% if you travel between the dates of June 16th and September 2nd. There's a few blackout dates around July 4th, just because that's a big travel weekend, but most people should be on the water at that time anyway. They also have been the generous sponsors for this series of events, enabling us to host them and make sure everybody gets the information they need to run the race, and also with some pre-departure events too. So we're really grateful to everything that they are helping us to do.
Wonderful. They're also very comfortable to fly in, much more comfortable than what Jim's about to describe.
Though you have to get your delivery crew to Hawaii, so this is important too.
Okay, all right, well, let's go with it. Caitlin, thank you very much. I know you've got stuff going on this evening, but thank you so much for joining us and sharing.
Yeah.
Okay, so Michael already said this, but just to reinforce, as we go, if you use the Q&A capabilities of Zoom to ask questions, don't be bashful. I'm going to try to present and keep an eye on the Q&A at the same time, and we'll kind of see how it goes.
Yeah, Jim, I can watch the Q&A and interrupt with those, so you don't even need to worry about it.
Sure, sure. One of the first questions people ask is, how long is this going to take to do? And these are kind of my, approximations. You might sit there and go, somebody's going to sail home in a 30-foot boat? And the answer is yes, people do sail home in 30-foot boats. I've even seen people in ultralight sail home in 30-foot boats. Not that I would do that. But, do keep these time frames in mind. And you always have to warn the delivery crew when you give them these kind of dates that, you go where the wind blows. So this is approximation, but, you're going to do what's safe and what's appropriate and what's not going to beat up the boat. So could this end up a few days longer? Yeah, it could. And it has at times, depending on the boat and the situation and the weather. Seasickness. So I'm going to give a list of kind of light things, and then we're going to dig more into, where do I go and how far do I go and that kind of thing. I would remind folks the delivery crew is frequently not as experienced. It wouldn't be unusual on a delivery crew to have someone on the boat who really hasn't done much offshore, so they don't know. So you've probably put a lot of time and thought into the crew going over, and probably not as much time into the thought of the crew coming back. So you do have to watch for that. You probably don't know the people coming back quite as well as you know as the people coming over. So all the same things you will learn like during the medical seminar, and just remember you're going to have those same issues, and things like seasickness are important. And I'll tell you, I came back once and one of the crew was seasick the whole way, 17 days. They weren't deathly ill. They were deathly ill for maybe 5 days. And then the rest of the time, they basically couldn't do much. Couldn't read, couldn't cook. So it was highly limited. Not to say it wasn't a good trip home, but you just have to recognize these kind of things can happen, and you kind of have to be prepared for it. Provisioning, I point out the Safeway. This is the Safeway in Kailua. Kailua is the Safeway is about a 10-minute drive from Kaneohe Yacht Club where you'll be. I usually grab all the delivery crew and we go to Safeway and we walk the aisles for an hour. And it's a mix of, my take on what would be reasonable food and the crew picking things they like. It's nice to give all the crew an opportunity to pick some food that they really appreciate and will enjoy. And also to say, don't buy that. Like, I'm allergic to peanuts, or, leave the peanut butter home. That kind of thing. And this does tend to happen kind of last minute. I mean, the awards banquet's usually on a Friday night. So it would be typical on a Saturday morning, the crew and I are, at Safeway loading up because all the crew are finally there. So we can do that. Do note, I am, and I know some people are not fans of this, but I'm a big fan of having several cases of bottled water on the boat. If you lose water due to something with the tanks, or salt water getting in your tanks, it's pretty ugly. If you have a few or several cases of bottled water, you'll kind of never have a problem, and never have to worry about somebody leaving a valve open that they shouldn't, or running water that they shouldn't. The other thing is fresh. Yes, Mike?
I would say one thing I'm going to be doing on Thursday, Melinda and I will be talking about provisioning. So you're giving a nice preview of that. One thing is, of course, on the delivery back, you may have some food left over from your trip over. Remember, that's stuff that even a race crew wouldn't eat.
But you need that stuff because the trip home is a bit more unpredictable and is quite a bit longer. So having, canned Dinty Moore, it sounds like a joke and it's the last thing you're going to eat. But if you need it, it's not bad. And oh, by the way, things like Dinty Moore or canned chicken or canned tuna, if your oven goes out, you run out of gas for whatever reason, something gets left open, you can still eat it. You're not going to starve. And I'll tell you, I had one trip, we were warming the food by putting the cans on the exhaust manifold as a way to warm them. And it happens, things like the solenoid that allows your gas to get to your oven dies, and those things really do happen.
Or you just forgot, as happened to one ex-Commodore that isn't me, mercifully.
Oof, oof.
They ended up eating room temperature, rehydrated, freeze dried the whole way back.
Ooh, that doesn't sound good.
It was not, I'm told.
Yeah. The other thing, fruit. I usually get a crate of apples, crate of oranges. That stuff lasts like forever. You'd be surprised. And when you're 10, 12 days out and you're having nice crunchy apples or oranges, it's pretty damn nice.
Hey, we got a question from Garrett. He wants to know, is LP gas available in Hawaii to refill the tanks? And I think if that's referring to propane, the answer is yes. But if it's referring to methane, in the big tanks that some of the boats carry for safety, as I recall, it's very hard to get in Hawaii. Jim, do you have something different on that?
Yeah, CNG is a problem. Propane is you can absolutely get it, but you have to go over to the Waikiki side.
Yeah.
And I've had to run through some hoops because they're only open certain times, and they look at my tank and go, "When's the last time it was stamped? I don't know if I can refill it." And so you do need to kind of take care of that thing kind of early in the week, and don't wait till the last minute. Is a bit of advice, and literally you just go online and go propane Oahu, and you'll find a few places. Just a few though.
Yeah, but the CNG, as I recall, is a real challenge.
Yeah, that's a problem. That's a problem. Okay, I noticed one other thing. There was a question about those times I gave earlier about how many days to return. That was to San Francisco. If you're going back to Portland, add a day, maybe 2 days. Seattle, again, add 2 days, maybe 3 days. LA and San Francisco are kind of about the same. You don't have to go as far north to go to LA, but LA is actually farther away than San Francisco, so they end up about the same time. Fishing gear, it would be a sin to not have fishing gear on a trip home. You just throw the line over the side when the sun comes up, and by mid-afternoon, if you pull it back in, or maybe you catch something. Mahi-mahi, albacore. It's an easy thing to do. It's entertainment, and when you're in the middle of the trip, fresh fish is pretty cool. And it'll be something that the crew, it's good for morale and spirits, and
up to a point. My number 2 guy on the last trip back on Oaxaca, third day we were eating on that tuna. As I was cooking it, he looks over and says, "Oh God, not tuna again."
Yeah, but that does mean you need to remember, wasabi,
Yeah.
soy. Maybe you like to do poke. It's always good to have a little cheap vodka or gin to use to quiet down the fish when you bring them on board, so you don't have to beat them over the head and have blood everywhere in the cockpit. Seriously, you pour a little bit of alcohol in the gills, shuts them right down.
Me too. Bob Walden also points out he's heard CNG can be refilled at sites that refill CNG vehicles, like utility companies. So that might be something to look into.
Yeah. The other thing is, half the trip will be pretty quiet. It's a little boisterous, the first 4 or 5 days, and it can be boisterous the last 4 or 5 days. A lot of the middle is relatively quiet. So, I like to keep the crew busy, and it's like we end up taking all the winches apart, cleaning them out. I sanded all the varnish down one trip on the way back. So, if you do this right, the boat will actually get back to the dock in better condition than when it left Hawaii. So keep those things in mind, and it's actually good. Keeps people occupied and productive during that middle 3, 4, 5, 6 days when things are pretty quiet. I always bring a boarding ladder, so we stop and go swimming once or twice. Whether it's just again it's kind of in the middle and it's quiet, and some people have refused to take a shower, and now I'm going to force them to get in the water. It's spooky.
I won't do it. I'm afraid I won't do it.
But it's one of those, when you look back 10 years or at a Hawaii trip, what do you remember? Going swimming in the middle is one of those things you will never forget. Yeah, you'll see wildlife. Hopefully not too close. Only bumped into a whale once. I've seen a lot of whales along the way. Sperm whales. You generally don't see sperm whales along the coast, right? We see humpbacks and grays and blues, but kind of out in the middle, you got a shot at seeing something like a sperm whale. And of course, dolphin, you may run into some big packs, 200, 300, 400 dolphin at once. Maybe, this is always a bit of a crapshoot. Glass floats, I will say they're getting rare. A decade ago, you could kind of count on finding one. These days, but it's funny, I always have a net. I have a fishing net I keep on the back of the boat, and all the crew knows. If you see the ball, you get it. So it kind of keeps the crew all their eyes open. And if they see a second ball, well, that ball's for the boat. Reading material, yeah, bring a lot of it. Assuming you got 3, 4, 5 people on the boat, you'll have just 1 or 2 people up at any one time. There's a lot of spare time, to say the least. And you'll kind of run through the reading material. And usually by the end, everybody's sharing who's got the best books, what did you like. Okay, so let's get a little more serious about what you have to deal with. One's the return crew. Qualifications, you got to be easy to spend time with is more important than sailing expertise. If they're hard to live with, you're going to want to kill them by the end of one of these return trips. And these return trips, like the 4, 5, 6 days, you're on a beat, maybe a loose beat, but it's a beat for 5 or 6 straight days. And if somebody's doesn't have a bit of good humor and a bit of levity, it can get old. So when you go to take someone, either you know them or somebody who's a really good friend of yours who will really tell you the truth about what this person is like, needs to know them. Otherwise, you can get surprised. And it is absolutely no fun. And it will take what can be a very fun trip and make it a not fun trip.
If I can add to that, having not followed that advice as well as one might like, if you're on the dock, if you're in Hawaii, and one of these people is already showing up to be a problem because you didn't know them that well, maybe they're refusing to help get the boat ready if that's part of your program, which I think it should be, and I think Jim agrees. Leave them on the dock, fly them home, don't take them.
Yeah, if it smells bad, it's only going to get worse. Now, a little bit about paid delivery crew. Get references. Absolutely check the references. I mean, serious. Talk to the skippers of boats that they've helped bring boats back. The other thing is consider shipping all your racing sails back. I know a few examples where the delivery crew kind of wasn't really watching, and they put racing sails up, and you find out a $6,000, $8,000 racing sail got trashed on the delivery home, and you're like, what were you thinking? But it's happened more than once to people I know, so it makes me say, be careful about that kind of thing. Okay, shade protection, you absolutely need it. I wouldn't go home on a boat without a Dodger. I just wouldn't do it. It would be too brutal. It's just, the sun, the water, again, the first 5 or 6 days, you're on a beat, the boats, there's a lot of water coming on. And at that point, it's a lot of sun. It's warm, but you're still getting kind of beat up with the sun and the water. And then the last 3 or 4 days, you may be getting beat up going into the California coast. I actually like a 10. I remember a trip home. We spent 4 days with a 10 up. It was quiet. We had the spinnaker up. We took the main down, put the 10 up, and it was absolutely wonderful for just kind of hanging out. So some of that stuff that you actually may ship over for using in Hawaii will come in handy on the trip home most of the time. Because again, almost everybody will have a few days in the middle where it's quite quiet. Fuel. Okay, you can't bring enough. And why fuel is important is because it gives you options. Weather's unpredictable. You will end up in situations where, hey, I'd really like the motor because, otherwise we're going to be sitting here for 2 days going nowhere. But you need fuel, and you kind of can't bring enough. The first trip I came back on my Cal 40, we had 70 gallons of fuel. Turned out to be enough, but I was sweating it. The next time we took 110 gallons of fuel, and you know what? I was sweating it again because there wasn't much wind and we were struggling. And the year after that with 110 gallons, we got back with 40 gallons. We didn't need it all. But this is one of these things. If you're the skipper, help, bringing the boat back, or the delivery captain, having fuel gives you options. And I'm going to talk more about that in a minute when I talk about the strategy on how to get home without kind of beating the crew up and beating the boat up. And fuel is a tool to do that. And whether that's with 5-gallon Jenny jugs or bladders, or however you want to do it, the more the better.
So diesel is a little hard to get to the boat these days in Hawaii. The fuel docks have closed. You may need to load your cans up and drive them to a gas station. There's a industrial supply near Kaneohe that gave us a great deal last time. But it's one of those things you want to get on early in your return trip arrangements.
Yeah, I've gotten in the habit of, because you sit there and go, do you get 8, diesel cans at the hardware store? And I've gotten into I get 4 of them. And then every morning on the way to the boat, I stop and fill the 4. So I get 20 gallons a day, and by day 5 or 6, I'm done, and it hasn't been stressful. It hasn't been spent half a day dealing with fuel. It just becomes I get a cup of coffee, I get 20 gallons of fuel in 4 jugs, and, I go to the boat. Now you can see here, this bottom picture, for many of the boats, you will be stern to a bulkhead. You can drive up 5 feet from your boat if you're on the bulkhead. So again, carrying these Jenny jugs is putting the fuel on the boat. Gets kind of not that difficult. A little tricky, being patient, not spilling fuel, because if you spill any in the water, everybody's going to know it. Now the bigger boats are going to be out on a pier, so not so easy. It'll be a bit more work, but at the same time, the bigger boats tend to have more crew, so it's kind of more hands to carry the fuel down the dock. Okay, coming home. Unless you're really, really good with weather and really good with routing, using Expedition or whatever, really think about paying a guy. Weather guy, Rick Shima, is based in Hawaii, and I think he's still doing it. And Commanders is on the East Coast. You could use these guys for the race, but also, and it's probably $100 for a report kind of thing. It's not that much. And you may want 2 reports, because you may want to report kind of when you're about to leave, and then another one like halfway, to make sure you're not, doing anything that could be hard on the crew or hard on the boat. And we'll get into that in a bit more detail on kind of what that means in a minute.
I'd also add that WRI, Weather Routing International, is providing us some support, and we'll actually be distributing a few free subscriptions to them for routing support also.
Yeah, cool. But you don't want to blindly just take off and go out there without having an idea of what's coming. And again, I'll get into that a little bit more. Another thing, don't delay. There's the party on a Friday night, and then there's Saturday, and I always want to get out of there on Sunday, because you see here, look at the Eastern Pacific Basin, number of systems. These are storm systems per year, hurricanes. There are a few of them that start to pop up in August. And if you look at the bottom there, recorded tropical cyclone landfalls in Hawaii. You see that Darby one on July 24th, 2016? A few of us remember that, because if you didn't get to Kaneohe by a certain time, the Coast Guard closed the harbor and said you were going to need to go hang out for a day or 2 before they'd let you in. Not a good thing. And you can see these other dates, right? Eugene in 93, and, going farther back, serious hurricane kind of stuff in August. Now, what happens more frequently is there's just lows spinning up. So more frequently happens is, the later you get into August, the more likely you're really going to have to think about a low. And a low being something that might be 30 knots, 40 knots, 50 knots. And it's just better, just avoid the whole thing. Get out of, and after the banquet, if you hang more than a week, we kind of want you out of there. They don't really want you hanging. They want you to go anyway. So you should kind of plan on it.
They've in fact mentioned that.
Yes.
They're not subtle.
Yeah. The other thing about flexibility when you're trying to set your leave date, I always tell my crew, the plan is to leave Sunday morning. But if we get the weather briefing on Saturday morning and it says the weather's great and it's going to go to crap in 2 days, I tell the crew we're leaving Saturday. So we're not, again, it's just being flexible, doing what is appropriate given the weather. I've also seen people who left on Sunday and it was absolutely terrible weather in terms of the trades were pumping, the trades were out of the Northeast, so you were kind of leaving Hawaii and heading toward Japan. And you know what? They should have waited 2 days. If they had waited till Tuesday, it slowed down, the wind swung to the west, they could have made actually some easting. And I remember a year, 3 boats turned around because they went out there and beat themselves and their crew up for 2 days and said, we can't do this, and turned around where the people who left 2 days later had a fine ride. But again, you're going to have people who are trying to meet a schedule, so you got to be really careful with the crew that you don't have people on a hard schedule, because otherwise you get kind of squeezed as the skipper to, do things that maybe you shouldn't. Okay, again, wind direction, that upper graph, northeast, east, southeast. So keep in mind, when the wind's out of the southeast, that means you can kind of go east while you're going north as you leave town. When it's out of the northeast, you're heading to Japan, which is pretty depressing. And it's not unusual. You can watch the weather, and this is the kind of thing the routing guys will tell you. You can see this weather where you give or take 2 or 3 days. You can kind of make it easier on yourself. That lower graph talks about the average wind speed. Now the average wind speed is actually going down. A 16 knots sounds pretty nice. But do keep in mind there are times where you'll get a few days of over 20 knots of breeze, which is a lot to be, hard on the wind for a few days. And again, you want to look at the weather, and if it's going to be, 20 plus knots and the trades are pumping, maybe you want to hang out for 2 days. Or maybe they're predicting the wind's coming up and the trades are pumping like on Tuesday, when it's like, oh, let's leave now. Let's get 3 days. Let's be leaving the trades by the time the wind comes up. So again, don't delay. Don't think about leaving too late, because you've got to worry about these tropical storms and hurricanes, and you really don't want to worry about it. But also avoid the bash. Don't leave when the trades are pumping and it's just going to be a bash for a few days. The other point is, you can see in this picture here, the importance of, reefing, small sails. This is a delivery. This is not a race. That's another thing you'll run into. You may have a crew person who's kind of behaving like it's a race when this is not a race. You do not want to break things. You want things to be comfortable. You don't want somebody breaking ribs because, you're pounding through the waves, instead of slowing the boat down and having a more leisurely approach to it all. Or cracking off a wee bit, again, so you're not pounding through the waves. If you're pounding, something needs to change. Okay, the trip home, lots of people hear about this and they go, what's this about? Here's a nice, if the wind's a little bit out of the east or southeast, you can get a little bit of easting as you go north. The high is sitting just north of Hawaii. You're sailing slightly cracked. You work your way into the high. The wind drops to, might be 5-6 knots. The boat's slowed down. Instead of doing, 6, 7, 8 knots those first few days out of Hawaii, on day 4, 5, 6, all of a sudden it gets light, and you can decide what to do. Do you want to sail more? Do you want to motor? Some of this has to do with how much fuel you have. Now note, I put a star there. That star's for a reason. That is, you're exiting the high. The wind is maybe 6, 8 knots, maybe it's getting up to 10, and you're looking at what's in front of you for the next 5 or 6 days. This is when you want to look at the weather report really hard, because what you don't want to do is just sail straight into a gale. It's not unusual to have 35 knots of wind and big seas, 10, 15, 20-foot seas off the California coast. That generally doesn't happen for more than 3 or 4 days at a time. And you can time it. You can sit there and go as you're motoring across the high, oh, it looks like, they're predicting a gale a week out. It's like, well, maybe I should, if I speed it up, can I get in before the gale? And maybe that means putting up more sail area or motoring more. Or you find, it's a honking gale just when you're going to get there. So you say, you know what, let's go swimming. Let's go spend the day fishing, swimming, relaxing. So it's going to take an extra 2 days to get home, but we're going to go into the coast in 10, 15, 20 knots, 25 knots, and we're going to avoid this 35 knot bit of nastiness that tears sails, beats up crew. It's just not good for it. What wears on the delivery skipper's nerves and family. Now, another reason, fuel. I'd say 4 out of the 6 times I've come back, the last 100 miles, we've motored. That absolutely does happen. Happens more than you think it does. So, if you're sitting there going, well, I'm going to use all my fuel to get out of the high, and then we'll sail the rest of the way home. Keep enough fuel. There is nothing worse than to be stuck just beyond the Farallones parked. We're doing 2 knots when home is that close. Yeah. Now, somebody goes, well, how much am I sailing? How much am I motoring? Depends on where the high is. Here's an example of the high being farther south, like smack in the middle of where you're going to go. And you're just not cutting the corner of it. You're going straight through the middle of it. Are you going to motor a day, 2 days, 3 days? So I have a Cal 40 and I've motored 4 days. Now that's kind of the worst case I've run into. But, that kind of thing can happen. And, this kind of route takes a whole bunch of fuel, because it's 3-4 days of motoring and then another 100 miles of motoring at the end, or 200 miles of motoring at the end, kind of depending. Here's a not fun one. The high is out toward Japan someplace. There is no getting to the high. You are basically sailing home. It's an upwind beat for 1,000 miles. Before you get to the point, you can kind of crack off a decent amount, and it feels more like a reach. Again, I put that star in there. When you're that 600, 700, 800 miles off the California coast, look hard at the weather and think, should I speed up? Should I slow down? What do I do to avoid getting whacked that last few hundred miles? This is a real trip home. You want to talk about how crazy it is. When people talk about, well, what's it normally like? Well, here's an example of, in fact, is this the Derby year? No, so a tropical spun up like right after the race finished. So when that low worked its way north of the course, and then a high started to reestablish itself. So between the low and the high, the wind was blowing from the south. So we were actually on a loose beat for a day, and then we put the spinnaker up for 2 or 3 days. It was craziness. But the high moved. There was a cutoff flow. Some of us have seen these cutoff flows near the coast. Well, you can come home with a cutoff flow. So there was a whole lot of motoring going on this trip. Here's another, example. I tried to talk about what kind of sails we had. So, the beginning of the trip back, it was 12 knots of wind. We had a working jib. We can get up to 18 knots. Now, 18 in a heavy boat like a Cal 40 is not a lot, but hey, let's throw a reef in, in the working jib, and it's totally comfortable. The wind starts to ease down at 10 knots as we approach the high, and take the reef out down to 4 knots as we're getting into the high, and then we're motoring. Now, in this case, the high was kind of below us, so we put the spinnaker up. Now, if you have a delivery crew, you may not want to leave a spinnaker on the boat because you may not want them to have that much fun with your spinnakers. But I was on the boat and I was like, hey, let's put the spinnaker up for a day. A bit more motoring. As we saw, we wanted to get in quickly. The weather looked pretty good. So it's like put the jib top up, motor, Spinnaker. Well, you'll love this. We had the Spinnaker up 500 miles offshore, coming into San Francisco, and then finishing up with a jib top in a brisk breeze. Now, one thing to note here, I am not a fan of going way north of San Francisco. Some people are like, well, San Francisco's like at 38 degrees, 50 minutes. Some people are like, well, I should go to 39. Should I go to 40? Should I go to 41? Just keep in mind, the farther north you go, the more time you spend out there. The more time you spend out there, the more opportunity there is for the weather to go to crap and for you to get whacked. So you really don't want to do a longer path than you really need to. The other thing is, depending on your boat, if you end up at like 40 or 41 and you need to kind of broad reach and run down to San Francisco, those last 200 or 300 miles in big seas and big wind, it is really hard to drive the boat. And it's really hard on the autopilot to drive the boat in those kind of off the wind conditions. Where reaching is kind of easy peasy for everybody.
Jim?
Yes.
I've been tracking return fleets now for, an easy 12 years. And, I think the go way north is sort of advice that was from a day when weather forecasts weren't as reliable and the routing software wasn't as accessible. When I watch the boats heading to San Francisco, almost nobody goes north of San Francisco anymore. It's head up to 38 degrees and turn right. A couple of boats will vary from that, but I think between that and changing weather patterns, it's not a thing.
Absolutely. The quicker you get in, the better. Okay, here's a real route straight off the GPS. So somebody, so you can see this is, exactly what we did. We had we got some nice easting in. We were like, do we turn the motor on? Do we tack? We kind of jiggled a little. There's that little leg going due north to Alaska. And I was like, yeah, that's not good. Throw the engine on. And engine on for probably 2 days here till we got up to the corner, about 39, and then just reach on in. Here's a typical kind of route that I've done leaving Hawaii, going, what's the best way home, and it does what you would think. Now keep in mind, this is an expedition route using racing polars, which is not what you're going to do, right? Because you're going to have delivery sails up, and you're going to have the sails cracked a bit. You're not really pushing. But it's an engine. Well, you can use. I've had fun. One of those options with expedition, you can put in there, if the boat speed drops below 4 knots, the engine goes on, and the boat speed will never be less than whatever 4 or 5 knots. There's all kinds of fun things you can learn to do when you've got lots of time on your hands. Yeah. So again, typical trip home. Communications. Now, we've tried to do a single sideband roll call. I'll tell you, it didn't work the last race. So these days may be over. At the same time, I think there were 3 of us who got on the single sideband every night and chatted a little bit. But it definitely was not, as much fun as, as it has been in times in the past. But if there's some of you got single sidebands and you want to kind of have some fun, we'll usually have some kind of schedule to kind of catch up. Sometimes it's about, you want to talk to someone for kind of moral support. When you're in the middle and, the wind's light, or you're worried about fuel, and it's kind of nice to be able to talk to someone.
We did do the online newsletter, and Jim, you were quite a contributor to that. So we'd get the return fleet to send in amusing messages. We'd compile them on land and send it back out later in the day. And that didn't really take the full place of that, but I think it provided a bit of distraction for folks.
Yeah. And what was really fun about your newsletter is we're all, got a little competition going on who was getting the biggest and the most fish.
Yes.
And who was catching no fish that we could all have jokes about. And you could see the people who forgot to bring the fishing gear and regretted it. Okay, on the medical side, We are doing this again. This will be covered in a future seminar. I do want to tell people it's important. The chance you will have medical problems on the trip back is greater than having medical problems on the trip to Hawaii. Some of that is just because you're there longer. It really does matter the fact you're out there an extra 3, 4, 5 days than you did on the trip over. I think also some of it is you have different people who maybe you don't quite know as well. The other thing is this is going to be a straight pitch. You really want to use these guys. I had to 2 years ago. And I had a crew member who wanted to use his Kaiser doctor, and it was a nightmare. Because a doctor in a hospital, you're talking to them on your your Iridium satellite phone, and it's kind of squawky and squeaky, and it's hard to kind of tell. And doctors in hospitals on land, they won't do anything that they're a little unsure of. They're very liability conscious, that they might accidentally tell you something inaccurately, and somebody misheard something. And I'll tell you, we had this situation with a Kaiser doctor who was like, not only was it, I don't understand you, say it again, say it again, say it again, but it was also, can you call me back at 4:30? And the answer is no, we can't call you back at 4:30. Or, after you have that first discussion or two, can we go to email? Because it's just much more reliable and actually clearer than trying to talk on a satellite phone, again, which is kind of squeaky and rough and not that reliable. A regular doctor will not prescribe anything, will not give any advice via email. They just won't do that. These folks, they get it. They're there 24/7. They understand what it's like talking to somebody on a sat phone and how it's kind of rough and, can you say that again? They understand, yeah, let's switch to email now because it's easier and a more reliable way to communicate. The other thing, you go to a regular doctor and they figure out what they think you need. They then go, oh, you need this, this, and this. Go to your local pharmacy. These guys at George Washington, in the very beginning, they go, tell me what you got on the boat. Tell me what antibiotics you have. Tell me what instruments you have. Let me know what you got so I can tell you what to do given what you have. Something a regular doctor would just never, they wouldn't do it. They don't, the liability thing, which gets pounded into them every day when you're at a land-based hospital, just prevents them from, frankly, being very effective at sea.
So we're doing a first aid presentation for the boat. Dr. John Tausig is going to talk this coming Tuesday, same time, same channel. We'll also attempt to do a simulated call to the GWU guys. We are in contract with them to provide medical services for this race, and they will be available for an incredibly modest fee, paid in advance, for the return. I think it was $65 last year.
And do you have to pay twice, once for the trip over and once for the trip back?
No, for the trip over, it's covered in your entry fee. For the trip back, it's an add-on.
Yeah, so I'm telling people, get it. I had a situation, there were 4 of us on the boat. One person had a UTI, a urinary tract infection, and it's like, ooh. It was like, pull out the antibiotics, and then, hey, my wife's a nurse, that helps. And she knows sat phones. It's like, honey, what do you think? This antibiotic or that antibiotic? And she's like, I'm not a doctor. It's like, come on, give me some advice here. But then I had someone who came down with a pretty serious lung infection. I mean, like 104-degree fever. It was like, this is bad. And I'll tell you, the GW folks kind of pulled our bacon out of the fire. And they were professional and available and there. And it took what could have been really bad and it made it okay.
We'll be doing what we need to do to deal with the current situation. We're not sure what we need to do yet, but whatever it is, we'll do it.
Yeah. So make sure who's ever bringing the boat back knows what you have on the boat. I do point out antibiotics because actually the number one thing, probably I've seen it happen probably 5 times now where people got in serious trouble, was they got like a staph infection. They got some kind of infection where the answer was antibiotics. And you need more than one. You need typically, I'd like to have 3 different antibiotics. If one doesn't work, you can kind of move to the next one. But you can't buy this stuff when you're out there. If it's not on the boat, you're kind of stuck. Um, and I did a single-handed race, and somebody almost died from a staph infection. So not a place to pinch. Are we having tracking again, Michael, for the way back?
Yeah, that'll be available again as an add-on, not too pricey, but it really makes your family at home happy if you do it. There's other ways you can have your boat tracked, but this is by far the simplest for this race.
Yeah, so I'm gonna recommend people you'll have spent, if you're lucky, 10 grand, but maybe 20 grand, 30 grand, 40 grand. Mike, you have a big boat. We won't talk about it.
No.
But to spend an extra, whatever, 80, $100, so you have a very reliable way for people to know where you are. Even when bad things happen, your electrical system goes out, all your other means of communications go to crap, people still know where you are, and they know you're making progress, and they're not getting kind of overly nervous about what's going on.
Yeah, when we get calls, and it'll be either from your family, it's also been from the Coast Guard. It's very nice to be able to say, looking at their track, it's clear that the boat is still under command. It is moving with intent. They're fine. Probably somebody just left the phone off the hook. Don't worry.
Yeah, and almost every year there's one boat that has complete electrical failure. I mean, complete. They lose their engine, their panel shorted out, and they're basically living on, AAA, AA, and C batteries. Again, so having the tracker is a good thing. So reaching the end here, I just want to encourage people, work with the weather, not against it. If the weather's bad, it's okay to say the trip's going to take an extra day or 2 or 3, because we are not going to just sail into, a full gale on the coast. You're not going to avoid it at all
Right.
costs. Have had good friends lose boats.
Mm-hmm.
And 20 years ago, this would happen to you because you couldn't see it coming. These days, whether it's a weather router or you're getting Gribs or WeatherFax, there's no reason to sail into weather that's going to hurt the boat or hurt the crew. And then last, I think Michael's going to talk a little bit here about shipping the boat home, which you can do if you can get it on a trailer.
Yeah. Do you have more, Jim?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, so before we get into shipping the boat home, and also a brief talk about the Marine Mammal Center, do we have questions about that anybody would like to pose to Jim? You can put it up on the Q&A or the chat. We might even unmute you if we're feeling particularly charitable. There's 42 of you out there. Okay, I'll talk briefly about shipping. Oh, wait, actually.
Oh, Mike, I'm actually going to interrupt, because the one thing I didn't say.
Yeah.
I love the trip home. I actually like the trip home better than the race over. The race over is fun, but the pressure, the pushing, you're pretty worn down by the time you get to Hawaii, and you're kind of like, I had enough of this racing stuff. I need a break. Yeah. And that trip home, eating, fishing, swimming, autopilot's driving the whole way home, and you're reading books, and it is so relaxing. It is such a great way to decompress.
So Jim is clearly our #1 cheerleader for sailing home, and it really is a nice exercise. If your boat is well prepared, and you do want to do that. One rule of thumb, Jim, and tell me if you think I'm wrong, I like to say that however unprepared your boat is, expressed as a percentage of 100%, however unprepared it is, multiply that by 5, and that's how unprepared your boat will be by the time you finish. So if you're, say, 5% unprepared, you've got some wear on some lines and whatever, by the time you get to Hawaii, you'll be 25% unprepared. Well, that's okay. That's a boat that's kind of sad, but you can get it ready. But if you start your trip back with the boat, say, 20% unprepared, by the time you get to California, you'll be 100% unprepared, which means what? Your boat has fallen apart. I don't know. I made that up.
Yeah, well, the worst, Michael, isn't the boat will be falling apart, is everybody on the boat will hate each other.
Well, yeah, that's true. A boat, and I've in my early years doing this stuff, I was guilty. A boat that's a floating repair project, particularly where that's a surprise to people, can be very stressful for everybody as well as mildly dangerous. We have a question from Andy McCormick. How do you ship stuff over to Hawaii? We will be expecting to have a container with a modest price for putting the things in, and Caitlin has arranged that. We're talking right now with both Pasha and Matson to see what's the most suitable for our participants and for the organization, frankly. It is also possible to ship things by air freight, particularly if you have somebody who's a licensed shipper. That costs more, but it might work for you. But usually the container is the better way to go.
I love the container, right? And it's
Oh yeah,
typically, I don't know, $250 or $300 or something, and
yeah. I we'll see.
and the container ends up in the Kaneohe parking lot, the Kaneohe
Yeah,
Yacht Club
so it'll
parking
start
lot.
out at the Richmond Yacht Club parking lot and end up at the Kaneohe Yacht Club parking lot, and then it'll return. Can you put diesel jugs in there if they are sparkling clean? So don't show up with a slick of diesel in the jug. You're going to need to wipe it out.
Yeah, I got so tired of that. I just go buy 4 diesel jugs in Kaneohe. It's easier.
Well, you can't always count on finding them, but that's what I certainly did my first race too. I think I had some blue ones and some red ones and some yellow ones because that's all I could find. Okay, so shipping the boat home. I don't have some slides, but I do have some materials on the knowledge base.
Do you want me to stop the share, or do you want to go browse?
Oh no,
something?
you can leave that up. It's insulting. It's fine. But at some point, I'm going to ask you to unmute Rowena because we want her to talk a little bit about the Marine Mammal Center. So you can find her in the You know how to do it. You know
I'm working on it.
Yeah. So I have shipped my Passport 40 home 4 or 5 times, and at 40 feet long and 18,000 pounds. Is that right? 20 feet. 22,000 pounds. That's about as big a boat as you're really going to want to sail. It could have sailed back on its own and has sailed back on its own. But the formula is basically the same for almost everybody shipping their boat, which is one, you need a trailer. Now the smaller boats, you already have a trailer. The larger boats, you'll need to scrounge around and find one. There is a profession called a freight forwarder or freight expediter that may be able to help you do that. There was a guy I used to work with, Kevin Jones, who did a great job of that. Unfortunately, he passed away. So he's not going to be much help. But you will want a trailer. You will want to hook up with your shipping company. Now, the 2 main shipping companies that are going to be able to help you are Pasha, which has been and I believe will be a sponsor again, and Matson, which has been a sponsor in the past and has not been able to. They've got to ship out of commission, so they've not been eager to sponsor, but they are willing to help out our Pac Cup racers. Both of them sail out of Honolulu. Pasha ships down to San Diego or Long Beach, and from there you would typically truck your boat north, which I have done. Matson ships directly into Oakland, which can be more convenient for a Northern California sailor. They both do an extremely professional job. They're both RoRo, which stands for roll on, roll off, which is considerably less expensive than trying to lift your boat onto a trailer, onto a cradle, and then take up a whole stack of deck space. So the procedure for shipping your boat home is verbally quite simple. You get it to a yard, you de-rig it, you take down the mast, If your total height is more than 14 feet, you may need to take off your pulpit or your push pit or your dodger. You want to take your dodger off anyway, just so it doesn't get beat up at some point. You wrap stuff up so it doesn't flop around and scratch stuff. A trick that Kevin Jones taught me was you tape a soda can to the end of your mast, and if it's crushed, why then you know that somebody bonked your mast and they may need to replace it for you. It's just a little bit of a telltale. Depending on how antsy the shipper is, you can put a bunch of crap in your boat and send it home. I think we sent home the entire Pacific Cup set of gear one year inside my passport. Anyway, you have to have somebody take the trailer over to the boatyard. What do they call the place where the ships go? That place.
Well, usually Kihei Marine's usually where you go.
You go there with your boat, and then they need to haul it over to the Matson ship.
That's right.
Right, and you'll pay that guy. You're going to pay everybody along the range here. They'll load it onto the ship. They'll take it to Oakland if it's Matson, unload it. Then you got to have it hauled to another boatyard, launched, and the mast stepped. If you don't have a lot of work to do on the boat, that last step can be fairly inexpensive. On the other hand, as has happened with me, once you're in the yard and you say, well, as long as we're here, let's check this, and the other thing, you may be writing a larger check there. For shipping my passport, I've ended up spending, and remember, this is at the high end of shipping a boat, I've ended up spending about $20,000. Shipping a smaller trailerable boat can be considerably less than half of that. So
I've shipped a More 24 back for under 3,000.
When?
I know somebody else who did it just recently. He came back
Boomer.
for 3,000 a share. Yeah,
okay, Boomer.
It's possible.
2012 says Carl.
And if you go back,
Carl Robrock says in 2014, $2,900. So, yeah, I mean, there's a cube value there that just,
So here's the key thing everybody needs to know about the cost. This is not some fixed price thing. They tell you how much. It's a bit unpredictable.
Yeah.
There are drayage costs. There's this cube volume cost. There's the every time they move the boat cost. So just recognize.
God help you if you have to drive a 40-foot boat through the streets of Berkeley. You got to have a follow vehicle.
Yeah, and Cal 40s have been shipped back for kind of $10,000 to $12,000. Your passport was definitely worst case.
Well, the passport is a bit fatter than the Cal 40, so we ended up paying penalties in several directions. Every time you exceed the size of this basically container-shaped envelope, you pay a bit extra. So anyway, the upside, you stop the wear and tear on your boat. You know where the boat is. You don't have to deal with provisions and blah, 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 blah. Maybe you need to get back to work. It has happened in some cases, and this is how I shipped my boat the first time I shipped it. We lost our forestay 700 miles out of Oahu, so we turned around and went back and arranged to ship the boat, basically in 3 days. So there's some upsides to it. It may fit your program better than sailing it. If you've got the time, it sounds like sailing is great, and I certainly enjoyed bringing Oaxaca back, even though it was 2016 and a challenging year to sail. Looks like we have another Q&A question. J120 last race about 25K. Mike Mahoney asks, is that who that is? Spelled it wrong. What is the maximum size you can ship home? I think there are max sizes that force some boats to be shipped to SoCal, then trucked. What's the trick to get it to come into the port of Oakland? That's a lot of questions. Let's see.
And there's no max size. It's how
Not
big's your
anymore.
wallet.
No. Both Pasha and Matson have upgraded their fleets So I don't believe we have any entrants that are not possible to ship. The cost may go up. In some cases, a particular boat, remember the old Matson boats, if your total height was more than 14 feet, they couldn't get you in the door. They've raised that significantly, so now that's no longer a problem.
And
So,
I'm gonna guess the J125 is real expensive because it's got a long keel, so this thing was way high.
oh, could be, yeah. Well, you may need to remove the keel, and then you're looking at a whole different set of challenges. What's the trick to get it to come into the Port of Oakland? Well, look on the side of the ship, and if the word on the side of the ship begins with an M, and it's Matson, it's going to come into the Port of Oakland. We did actually, and this was a wonderful move by our friends at Pasha. The first time they sponsored with us, they actually diverted one of their ships to Oakland to serve the race, and that was amazing. It was also hugely expensive for them and really annoyed them. So I have had them ship my boat to somewhere in Southern California, load it on a truck, and drive it north. And you know what? It worked fine. It's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the world.
But you missed that fun trip home.
I did. the deal we had in our family was, you can sail over, I want you back, which is kind of nice, you know. So you get Mary to sail back with you from time to time. That's a whole different deal.
Oh no, but she's never come back with me.
Oh,
Doing
is that
9
right?
trips over, she's never come back.
You know, people ask which one's the smart one in that family. Okay.
Do you want me to turn on Rowena? What do you want
Let's
to
turn
do?
on Rowena and see if she is available to talk to us, because I think your comment on wildlife was apropos, to talk to us about our relationship with the Marine Mammal Center. Rowena, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, you sound good.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Jim. And I want to say I also love the trip home. I think I've done that 4 times. So part of our commitment to Sailors for the Sea and our clean regatta is to provide information on marine wildlife and habitat through local organizations. And so I want to give a shout out to International Bird Rescue and to the Marine Mammal Center. They're both environmental partners of ours, as well as the Ocean Voyages Institute, who's doing such a great job picking up marine debris. And you can find out more about all 3 of these organizations on our spanking new Pat Cup green pages. So
That's right.
Please have a look at those groups, and let's see what we can do to promote them and help them out, because they're all 3 are doing great jobs.
One of the things that many of our sailors get involved in on the return trip, and we'll be looking for more opportunities, is what some people call citizen science. Typically observing, taking temperatures, taking specified observation periods to count trash. Hi, Mary. And you're muted. One thing I did that was just fascinating was I got hooked up with a researcher at NOAA back when they had those, and he had me tow a microphone through the water for 1,000 miles. We were listening for beaked whales, which was just the coolest thing. We didn't find any apparently, but we found all kinds of other things. So as we approach the start date, we will share opportunities to participate in science and environmentally minded activities. Rowena, we don't have a picture of you, so I don't know if you're on the edge of your seat waiting to add more.
No, I'm not. That's great.
Okay.
But yeah, you're right. We will be getting more information out, especially to the delivery boats, on ways that they can participate in citizen science.
Bob Gray adds in the Q&A, if you wait to get to Hawaii to decide whether you're going to ship your boat home, you're going to pay more. Yes, you are. Jim, do you have anything you want to add there? Because I think we're at the end of our program unless a few more questions come up. You're muted.
Mary's been practicing her ukulele in the background, so she thought she'd play something as our session ends.
I love it.
Somewhere, oh, this is by Iz, a Hawaiian
Yes.
song. Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high. There's something wrong. Sorry, guys. I'm just saying have a nice time, and this is a great thing to do on the way back.
All right. I think we have. Let's see. J120 last race 25K. We answered the maximum size. Any final thoughts? I think we're going to wrap it up, folks. We got provisioning on Thursday. We got medical next Tuesday, and we'll be sending out announcements about further programs as we come up. This will be recorded and posted with a link from our website. Jim, thank you very much. Mary, thank you for the loan of Jim. Caitlin, Rowena, everybody else, all 42 of you. This has been great.
Thank you, Mike.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Close the meeting. Good.
Have a good evening, Mike.
And you too.